The music swelled, violins weaving a melody that should have felt romantic, magical, unforgettable. Instead, it pressed down on me like a weight I couldn't shrug off. My lips curved into a smile for the cameras, for the aunts in sequined dresses, for the cousins holding up their phones. I knew what they saw. A radiant maid of honor, proud to stand beside her sister on the happiest day of her life. What they didn't see, what I worked so hard to bury beneath layers of mascara and rehearsed cheer, was the truth that gnawed at my chest. The groom was supposed to be mine, not in some distant fantasy, not in the girlish dreams of first crushes or make-believe fairy tales. No, he had looked me in the eyes, taken my hands in his, and told me once, not long ago, that he would marry me, that I was his future, that his heart belonged to me. And now here I stood, holding my sister's bouquet as she prepared to walk down the aisle to him. I could still remember the first night we met. It was at a friend's rooftop party in downtown Chicago, string lights twinkling above us, the city sprawled like a glittering sea below. He had this way of listening, of leaning in, like my words were the only ones that mattered in the chaos around us. We laughed about the ridiculous DJ, about how overpriced the cocktails were, and when the night ended, he walked me to my car. His number appeared on my phone before I'd even turned the ignition. We fell quickly. Too quickly, maybe. Late night texts, long drives to the lake, whispered promises beneath blankets when the world outside felt too harsh. He said he loved the way I always told the truth, how I refused to pretend. You're real, he'd tell me, brushing hair from my face. And that's what I need. And yet, here we were. He was at the altar waiting for my sister, not me. The betrayal wasn't sudden. It had unfolded like a slow leak, one I ignored until the flood drowned me. First the missed calls, then the excuses. Work ran late, family obligations, exhaustion. Then came the night I found him sitting across from my sister at a downtown cafe, their heads bent close, their laughter too intimate for just friends. I confronted him. He swore it was nothing. I confronted her. She rolled her eyes, said I was paranoid, that I saw shadows where there were none, but shadows have a way of becoming shape, and shape eventually becomes truth. By the time I uncovered the truth, that they weren't just meeting in cafes, that she wasn't just my sister, but his secret confidant, his new obsession, it was too late. My sister wore the ring. My sister sent the engagement photos to the family group chat. My sister beamed when she said, I can't believe I found my soulmate. And me? I bit my tongue until it bled. The photographer's voice snapped me back to the present. Closer together. Big smiles. I tightened my grip on the bouquet, slid closer to my sister, and pressed my cheek against hers for the shot. Her perfume was too sweet, suffocating. The groom stood just feet away, adjusting his tie, his eyes flicking toward me for a fraction of a second. A flicker of recognition, regret, something I couldn't tell. And then he turned back to her, cupping her hand like she was the only woman he had ever loved. The applause roared as the ceremony began. Guests rose to their feet, phones held high, snapping photos of the bride and groom like a modern fairy tale. I clapped too. What else could I do? This wasn't my story anymore. I was just an extra in theirs, a prop to hold flowers and keep secrets. But my smile was a lie, and lies have sharp edges. As I stood in that chapel, surrounded by people who believed in the picture-perfect love story unfolding before them, I promised myself something. I would tell this story one day, not to ruin them, not out of revenge, but because my truth mattered. Because what they had built together was born out of betrayal, and I had carried that weight alone for too long. That day, though, I played my part. I clapped, I toasted, I twirled in photos with cousins and strangers. I gave speeches about sisterhood and finding your forever love. My voice didn't even crack, but deep down, as I watched her in his arms, dancing to the song he once played for me in his car, I knew part one of this story wasn't theirs. It was mine, and mine was only just beginning. The reception hall glowed with golden light, chandeliers casting their sparkle onto white tablecloths and champagne glasses. Laughter rose and fell like waves, punctuated by the clink of silverware and the thrum of a live band. My sister was radiant in her gown, her cheeks flushed pink, her hand never far from the groom's arm. They looked like a painting, picture perfect, effortless, untouchable. But I knew paintings could hide cracks beneath layers of paint. I stood at the edge of the crowd, a flute of champagne untouched in my hand. My smile stayed plastered, the same rehearsed curve I'd worn all day. Around me, relatives buzzed with gossip, but not the kind I expected. She looks stunning, doesn't she? My aunt whispered to another. The dress fits her like a glove. They're perfect together. Another chimed in, eyes glistening. It's like a match made in heaven. If heaven was built on lies, maybe? I excused myself, weaving through tables draped in ivory linen until I found a sliver of solitude near the back. That's when I overheard it. Two cousins at the dessert table, their voices lowered but not enough. Isn't it weird? One said. I always thought he and the maid of honor, you know, her friend snorted softly. Please, she wishes. Look at them. He never takes his eyes off the bride. Poor thing, though. Must sting, standing there watching. Heat rose in my chest, burning hotter than the champagne sliding down other people's throats. They didn't know the half of it. To them, I was just the jealous sister, the almost who was never enough. I turned away before they noticed me, blinking fast, forcing the tears back. Not here, not tonight. The first dance began, pulling everyone's attention to the center of the room. The groom led my sister onto the dance floor, his hand resting on the small of her back. The music swelled, soft, romantic, achingly familiar. My breath caught that song. It was the same song he'd once played for me on a rainy night, parked outside my apartment. I remembered the way he leaned across the console, lips brushing my ear as he whispered, "One day, this will be our first dance." Now it was theirs. The crowd swayed, sighing at the beauty of it. I pressed a hand against my stomach, trying to steady the nausea twisting inside me. When the song ended, the applause thundered, but in my ears it sounded hollow, like clapping at the end of a tragedy. I slipped outside, desperate for air. The night was cool, autumn's light threading through the wind. The stars above glittered faintly against the city lights. I leaned against the stone wall of the venue, pulling in deep breaths until my chest loosened. That's when I heard footsteps. Running away already? I didn't need to turn to know the voice. His voice. I straightened, arms crossed, keeping my eyes on the dark horizon. Just needed some air. He moved closer, his cologne tugging at old memories I didn't want. You look beautiful tonight, he said quietly, like it was a secret. I laughed bitterly. Save it. Compliments don't mean much when you're wearing a ring from someone else. Silence stretched between us, heavy and uncomfortable. Finally, he said, I didn't mean for it to happen this way. I whipped my head toward him, my control snapping. You didn't mean? You looked me in the eyes, told me forever, and then turned around and gave her the same lines. That wasn't an accident. That was a choice. His face tightened, guilt flickering in his eyes. It wasn't like that. I was confused. Confused? My laugh was sharp, humorless. Confusion doesn't buy engagement rings. Confusion doesn't stand at an altar. He stepped closer, desperation in his gaze. I loved you. I still stopped. My voice cracked louder than I meant. Don't you dare say that. Not here. Not now. The door opened, spilling golden light and chatter onto the patio. My sister's voice rang out, sweet and careless. There you are? Come dance with me. His shoulders jerked, torn. For a fraction of a second, his eyes lingered on mine, like he wanted me to answer for him, to give him permission, to let him off the hook. I said nothing. He turned, plastering on that same charming smile he used to give me, and walked back inside with my sister. The door shut, muffling the music again, leaving me alone in the dark. My chest ached, but beneath the pain was something new, something sharper, clarity. They had their story now, and I had mine. I wasn't sure yet what that meant, but one thing was certain. This night, this wedding, wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of something else, something only I could write. The morning after the wedding, I woke to a silence that felt heavier than noise. My phone was buzzing on the nightstand, dozens of missed calls and unread texts lighting up the screen. Cousins, aunts, even old family friends, all of them wanting to dissect the spectacle of the night before. I ignored every single one. Instead, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the bridesmaid dress still crumpled on the chair. The sequins caught the sunlight, glittering mockingly like they were laughing at me for standing there smiling while my world collapsed. I pressed my face into my hands, the shame washing over me again. Not just shame for what had happened, but shame for staying quiet when the truth clawed at my throat. By noon, my mother showed up unannounced, a bag of bagels in her hand and a look on her face that said she'd been rehearsing words all morning. You can't keep hiding, she said gently, setting the food on the table. The longer you stay silent, the more they'll twist the story. And believe me, people already are. I didn't need her to explain. Gossip spread faster than fire in our family. Already whispers painted me as bitter, jealous, the jilted sister who couldn't stand her siblings' happiness. Nobody wanted to believe that the groom, the charming, successful man my sister had paraded like a trophy, had once whispered promises into my ear too. It was easier to villainize me than to face the cracks in their perfect fairy tale. Let them talk, I muttered, biting into a bagel I didn't taste. I don't owe anyone an explanation. Mom sighed, sitting across from me. Sweetheart, silence is dangerous. It makes you look guilty, even when you're not. You think your sister won't use it? She'll spin it until you're the villain and she's the victim. Do you want that? Her words twisted like a knife. She was right. My sister had always been a master of the narrative, turning pity into power, disguising envy as innocence. If I let her control the story, I'd be erased completely. The days that followed were a blur of rumors. At work, coworkers whispered just a little too loudly in the break room. At the grocery store, neighbors offered me tight smiles laced with pity. Social media only worsened it. Pictures of the happiest couple alive flooded my feed, tagged with captions like "True love always wins." Each photo felt like a taunt, a reminder of what I'd lost and what she'd stolen. But underneath the humiliation, anger began to simmer. Not the wild, uncontrollable kind I'd felt that night on the patio, but a steady, pulsing burn that refused to fade. For years, I had played the role of the good sister, the quiet one, the one who swallowed hurt to keep peace. Now I wondered if my silence had been my greatest mistake. One evening, as the sun dipped low, I found myself scrolling through old messages, the late-night texts he'd sent me, the promises, the plans, proof. My hands trembled, my stomach knotted, but I couldn't look away. Evidence of everything I'd buried, everything nobody else would believe unless they saw it for themselves. My phone buzzed with a new message. From him, can we talk? Just once, privately. Please. I stared at the words until they blurred. A part of me wanted to delete it, to erase him completely. Another part, the wounded part, wanted answers I knew I'd never get. In the end, I didn't reply, but his message sparked something in me. If he was still reaching out, it meant he was unsettled. If he was unsettled, maybe, just maybe, the cracks in their marriage were already showing. And if cracks existed, truth could still seep through. That weekend, I went to Sunday dinner at my grandmother's house, something I'd avoided since the wedding. The room went quiet when I walked in, every head swiveling toward me. My sister was already there, glowing in her new role as bride, her husband's arm draped possessively around her chair. She gave me a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Well, look who decided to join us, she said lightly, but her tone carried an edge. We were just talking about how amazing the honeymoon was. I forced a smile, sliding into a chair. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Her eyes glittered with victory, as if my politeness was a concession. The table buzzed with chatter again, but beneath it I felt the undercurrent, the curiosity, the judgment, the unspoken questions hanging in the air. Halfway through dinner, my grandmother cleared her throat. Family is about honesty, she said, her gaze sweeping the table, and about respect. Without it, we're nothing. Her eyes lingered on me, then on my sister, before she returned to her meal. The silence that followed was thick. My sister's fork clattered against her plate. My heart hammered, knowing the words were meant for us both. Driving home that night, I realized something. The truth didn't need to be shouted. It was already there, simmering just beneath the surface, waiting for someone brave enough to pull it into the light. And maybe for the first time, I was ready to be that person. The following weeks were like watching a storm build on the horizon. At first, the sky only darkened a little, whispers of thunder rumbling faintly in the distance. But then the air shifted, heavy with tension I couldn't ignore. Rumors began to circle. They came quietly at first. An overheard conversation at the salon, a cousin's cryptic post online. Then one evening, a friend from high school messaged me out of the blue. Saw your sister's husband at a bar last night. He wasn't alone. My stomach twisted as I stared at the words. I wanted to dismiss it as gossip, but a part of me knew better. The man who had once promised me the world was incapable of staying loyal to anyone, not even the woman he'd chosen over me. Days later, confirmation arrived. A different friend sent me a photo, grainy but clear enough. Him, leaning close to a woman I didn't recognize, his hand resting on her knee in a way that left no room for innocence. I should have felt vindicated. This was proof, wasn't it? Proof that he wasn't the perfect husband my sister had paraded around. Proof that the betrayal wasn't mine to carry alone. And yet, instead of triumph, I felt something unexpected. Pity. Pity for my sister, who had stolen him out of spite, only to learn too late that some victories are poisoned. Still, I didn't rush to expose him. Not yet. The truth had a way of surfacing on its own, and I didn't need to play the villain in a story that was already crumbling. That Sunday, at another family dinner, the cracks showed. My sister arrived late, her smile brittle, her makeup layered thick to hide the redness around her eyes. Her husband trailed behind her, his jaw set, his phone never leaving his hand. The usual glow between them had dimmed, and everyone noticed. A rough week? My grandmother asked pointedly as we sat down. My sister's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Just busy, she said quickly. You know how it is. But her voice wavered, and the silence that followed told me no one believed her. I stayed quiet, watching. For years, I had envied her ability to command a room, to soak up attention like sunlight. But now, as she shifted uncomfortably under the weight of everyone's eyes, I realized something. Attention could just as easily scorch as it could warm. After dinner, while the others cleared dishes, I stepped out onto the porch. The cool night air grounded me, pulling me out of the suffocating tension inside. A few minutes later, the door creaked open, and my sister joined me. You're enjoying this, aren't you? She snapped, her voice low but sharp. I blinked. Enjoying what? Seeing me struggle? Don't think I don't notice you watching, waiting for me to fall apart. Her words stung, not because they were true, but because they revealed just how fragile she had become. I don't want to see you hurt, Lily, I said quietly. But maybe now you understand what it feels like to love someone who betrays you. To have everyone watching, whispering, judging. Her eyes flickered, the bravado faltering for a moment. But pride was a powerful shield, and she lifted her chin. He's my husband. We'll work through it. Unlike you, I don't give up so easily. I didn't argue. I simply looked at her, letting the silence speak. Deep down, I think she knew the truth. It wasn't about giving up. It was about knowing when something was broken beyond repair. That night, as I drove home, the image of her watery eyes haunted me. For so long, I had seen her as my rival, my enemy in this unspoken competition we never stopped playing. But now, stripped of her armor, she looked less like a victor and more like a prisoner of her own choices. The next week, Ethan, yes, I had finally allowed myself to call him by name again, reached out to me. Not with desperation this time, but with a quiet honesty. He asked to meet, claiming it was about closure. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a small cafe, the same one where he had once taken me on lazy Sundays. The sight of him sitting there, coffee in hand, stirred memories I wished I could erase. You were right, he said, before I even sat down. His eyes were tired, hollow. I wasn't ready for marriage. Not with you, not with her. I thought I could be the man you both deserved, but I was selfish. I hurt you both. His confession didn't shock me. It confirmed what I already knew. But hearing it out loud finally felt like a weight lifting. I don't hate you anymore, I said slowly. But I don't forgive you either. What you did changed everything. You broke us, not just me, but this family. And you have to live with that. He nodded, tears brimming. I already do. When I walked out of the cafe, the autumn wind tugging at my coat, I realized something important. His remorse wasn't my responsibility. His regret didn't heal me. My healing had to come from choosing myself, again and again, no matter how much the past tried to pull me back. Back home, I stood by the window, watching leaves fall in golden spirals to the ground. For the first time in months, I felt steady. The storm had not yet passed completely, but I was no longer standing at its center. I was learning to step away, to let it rage without me. And in that moment, I made a promise to myself. I would never again settle for scraps of love, scraps of loyalty. I would demand the whole thing, or nothing at all. The weeks that followed were strangely quiet, but not in a peaceful way. It was the kind of quiet that hummed with tension, like the air before lightning splits the sky. Family events became battlegrounds of glances and whispers. Half the room avoided me, unwilling to choose sides. The other half leaned in close, eager to hear what I'd say next, like I was a character in some soap opera playing out in real life. But the truth was, I didn't want to perform anymore. I didn't want to compete with my sister, or explain myself, or hold on to the scraps of a man who had already proven he wasn't worthy of either of us. I wanted freedom. One Saturday morning, I decided to take a drive out of the city. The leaves were beginning to change, painting the highways with streaks of red, orange, and gold. I rolled the windows down and let the crisp air fill my lungs, as though it could scrub out the remnants of betrayal still clinging to me. I ended up at a little park I hadn't visited since childhood, a place where my mom used to take us on picnics. Sitting on a worn wooden bench, I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who believed love was a fairy tale, that family was unshakable, unbreakable, that loyalty was forever. That girl was gone now, but in her place was someone stronger. Later that week, I got the call I knew was coming. My sister, her voice was tight, brittle. "Can we talk?" Part of me wanted to hang up, but something in her tone kept me on the line. We met at a small diner on the edge of town, far enough away that we wouldn't risk bumping into neighbors or relatives eager to gossip. When I walked in, she was already there, hands wrapped tightly around a mug of coffee. She looked tired, her makeup doing little to hide the dark circles under her eyes. "You were right," she said without preamble, her voice cracking on the words. He cheated, more than once. I found messages, pictures. For a moment, I just stared at her, unsure what to feel. Vindication, sadness, maybe both. "I'm sorry," she added, and this time her eyes brimmed with tears. "Not just for this, for everything. For taking him from you, for flaunting it, for turning it into a competition. I thought I was winning, but all I did was lose myself." The apology I'd waited for all these months, maybe even years, sat between us like a fragile offering. And yet, instead of triumph, I only felt exhaustion. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I admitted. "What you did cut deep. You weren't just my sister. You were supposed to be my best friend. And you betrayed me twice over." She nodded, her chin trembling. "I know. I don't expect forgiveness. I needed you to know I see it now." We sat in silence for a long time, the clatter of dishes and hum of conversation around us filling the space. For the first time in months, it didn't feel like we were enemies. We weren't allies yet, but maybe we were no longer locked in battle either. When I left the diner, I didn't feel lighter, exactly. But I did feel like a door had cracked open. Maybe not for reconciliation right away, but for something better than bitterness. That night, I called my mom. I told her everything. The confession, the apology, the ache that still lingered. She listened quietly, and when I finished, she said, "Sweetheart, forgiveness isn't about them. It's about you. You don't have to excuse what she did, but you can choose not to let it poison the rest of your life." Her words stayed with me. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It didn't mean pretending the betrayal hadn't happened. It simply meant refusing to carry the weight of it any longer. So slowly, I began to let go. I blocked Ethan's number for good. No more late-night texts, no more flowers delivered to my doorstep, no more empty promises on loop in my head. He was my past, and I refused to let him haunt my future. I kept my distance from my sister, but I no longer fueled the rivalry. If she wanted to heal, she would have to do her own work. I wasn't responsible for fixing her, just as she hadn't been responsible for breaking me. Instead, I focused on myself. I picked up new hobbies, joined a yoga class, started journaling again, took weekend road trips to places I'd never explored. I reconnected with friends who reminded me of who I was before betrayal had consumed me, and little by little, I began to feel whole again. One crisp autumn morning, I found myself back at the river, the same bench where I'd once sat and wondered if I'd ever recover. The water shimmered under the sunlight, and I felt a sense of peace I hadn't thought possible. Loyalty is precious. Trust is fragile. Betrayal often comes from those you love most, but I had survived it. I had chosen myself. As I sat there, a smile tugging at my lips, I realized something. This wasn't the ending I had imagined when I once dreamed of marrying him, of building a life by his side. It was better, because it was mine.